Hi everyone and welcome. We're down here in my wormery and there's things scattered all about. I just started getting things ready for feeding my bins. So we're a little bit ahead of where we normally are. So just to give you an idea of what I need to take care of today, I've got a tray of frozen food items, kitchen scraps over there on the table, as well as some coffee grounds and some hacked up paper for bedding, which I'm going to use to feed the bins. And up in the foreground you can see my two VermiBags with the night crawlers, and back here I've got trays with red wigglers in them. Now my newest bin down here is only maybe a week and a half old, maybe not even that old, and it only got fed maybe 5 days ago. So I think that one's good to go. It was a pretty generous feeding. That one's going to be good for a while. So it's only these two up here that need to be fed. It's been 10 days since all these bins were last fed, so hopefully they've had a good chance to take a bite out of the food that they were given last time. So let's take a peek at how things are progressing. We'll start over here in the VermiBag Mini with the European night crawlers. So you can see down here in the VermiBag there's a fair amount of bedding that was laid down. So before we get going, I'm going to just pull some of this out just so we can have easier access and visibility into the upper surface of the composting bin. As we get down, we can already see some worms hanging out on the food. Oops, let's leave the food there. Just try to take some of this bedding off the top. So in multiple places we can see worms just hanging out right on the top. Probably coming by for the grit, which is usually right on the top surface. But then again, these are surface feeding type animals, as far as I know. So if you remember from previous videos, I've been for some time now thinking that I'm kind of operating this bin incorrectly, since it is a flow-through style container with the harvesting of the finished compost happening out of the bottom with a little hatch that opens up on the bottom. You really shouldn't be tilling up the bottom of it constantly. So even though I did that for a while from the very beginning, treating it like a regular bin and kind of going down into it regularly, I've kind of made the decision to stop doing that and start just top feeding this thing only. And obviously that means we're not going to see quite as many worms when we're working on this bin, but it is, I think, the way this bin is supposed to be used. So, or this type of bin at least, you know, because it's a flow-through system. But before we put in the new food scraps, why don't we just take a little look at what's happening down in here. Obviously we got some worms hanging out, enjoying the food, and I think that is made possible with all that bedding that we had on top of it, so it makes them feel a little bit more secure about coming out to the top surface. Although, you know, I've seen a lot of other people's videos where they open up their bin, there's nothing covering it, and the worms are all hanging out right on the top surface, so might not really make much difference. So just curious to see how some of these food items are going. You know, these after 10 days you would think that this stuff would be pretty far along, but I think just to help it, I'm going to just kind of inspect most of the food items we have here. Okay, yeah, grade A size large eggs. So here we've got an egg carton, but this here, oh, the bread. Okay, well, here we go. Now I'm just kind of breaking my own rules here because I'm just spurred on by my own curiosity. But yeah, this is the bread that we threw in here not too long ago, and it is very moldy. That's why I didn't really recognize it. And it is kind of, seems almost dry, so I'm just going to put this kind of mushy, whatever that is there, maybe an apple on top of the bread there, just to help with moisture balance. Here, the bread too is almost like a dust. You break it and you can see a little bit of dust flying off of it. So here, let's see if I can find another juicy morsel to stick on top of it. Maybe it's not even necessary. I just sort of can't help myself. I don't know why. Sorry. Maybe as time goes on I'll get better at disciplining myself without fiddling with everything here. But I think it is safe to trust that not far below the surface, whatever food was down there is getting broken down nicely and will soon be fresh compost. Alright, let's get these guys fed. So here we have some paper towels that were used to dry strawberries, so they're nothing more than just a little bit discolored. Nothing wrong with these pieces of paper towel at all. But whatever, they've been discarded, treated as trash, so we'll give them to the worms. I tried running this stuff through a shredder, and all it did was get little marks where the blades were, I guess. Maybe it's just too soft or something. But the my shredder just couldn't really cut through the material. All right, I'm just going to use this as an opportunity to inject a little moisture into the bin by soaking all of these paper pieces with my sprayer. So kind of, instead of making the paper into a wick that's going to absorb moisture from the items that are around it, it'll maybe even add moisture to the bin in general. We'll start plopping in some of this stuff. What is this? Looks like lettuce that's gone bad. Some strawberries that were classified as no good anymore, although they don't look too bad to me. Everything here has been frozen. It's out of the freezer. So just the thawing process of this stuff, as it starts to thaw, it'll start kicking off moisture much more than if it were just placed in here raw. Another thing that we added recently to the bins was citrus. And there was such a nice citrusy smell to the bin when I did that last time, I almost forgot. But since there was a little bit left, I figured let's include that with today's feeding and get rid of the last few bits of citrus. Generally, people say don't feed citrus. Maybe it's because of the acid content, maybe it's just the oil in the skin, something like that. I think in time the worms will figure it out and eat whatever they can. All the other life forms in the bin will take care of the rest. Okay, some Brussels sprouts, some potato peels, some cabbage. So I've given this bin a nice coating of fresh food across the top. Let's here's the traditional grand finale of most of my feedings, which is a little bit of coffee and a little bit of grit. Grit in my case being pulverized eggshells. Okay, we'll leave this bin the way we found it. Cover it back up with this paper. And here again, maybe this is just another opportunity to ensure that the moisture levels are good. Even though this stuff is not terribly dry, I can feel that it is a little bit dry. So why don't we give this stuff a squirt too before we cover it all up and put it back to work. And on that note, give the same treatment to the paper that covers it all. Alright. Well, let's move on to the other VermiBag with the other night crawlers. This is the VermiBag tote, and in here we have the African night crawlers. I'll get some of these lights over here to illuminate the scene. Alright, so once again we could use our handy dandy tray here to lift off and hold on to our surface bedding while we feed, so we can get a better look at how things are progressing in here. You already see a fair number of worms hanging out, scurrying away because they don't like the light. Here too we can see parts of a egg carton thrown in here as bedding. And I would imagine that this super green stuff right underneath has got to be that bread. So as you can see, the materials in here from previous feedings are in some cases still clearly intact, in other cases well on their way to being broken down. And you know, throughout the material there's worms taking care of that business here. pretty content. I feel that the material on the edge is a little bit dry, but not too dangerous. Well, maybe it is getting to the dangerous point if I can't even break it. It's like a piece of cement. Okay. Good to know. Probably best just to bring that really dry stuff inboard a little bit and subject some fresh material to that now. I guess I'll have to pay closer attention to make sure that the material in this bin doesn't dry out too much. Let's see how the other edge is doing. Here too, a little bit dry, but not as dry as that other side. Interesting. Alright, so I'll definitely have to keep an eye on this one a little bit more. But let's see how things are happening in here. This is one of those old corn cobs. Man, do these things take a long time. There were 2 of them. So I'm not sure where we'll find the other one. I don't want to go too crazy digging up this entire bin, but I do like to get a sense of how the previous feedings are progressing. So I don't have to go down very far to feel that I'm in pretty much castings only, like here. And pretty nice material. Sorry guys. Now this, although it's a VermiBag, is not Flow Thru like the VermiBag Mini that we just worked on previously. This is really just a bag that is, you know, to be treated just like your everyday worm tray. It'll have to get harvested by material being scooped at the top, just like any other worm tray. So that's why I don't feel so bad kind of working my way through the material a little bit just to make sure everything's doing okay. I guess this is what kind of worried me about the VermiBag Mini too, is that I'm a little bit worried that the material at the very bottom might be very dry. And if it is, then I guess it's not the end of the world. But I guess that just means worms are going to move out of that material, and there's that greater potential for having a bunch of uncomposted food in there. Let's get this piece back down in here. Start thinking about how we're going to administer this next feeding here. I've had some ideas about moving away from the center and maybe starting into sort of a horizontal migration approach for this bin. Here's the other corn, by the way. And I guess what that really means is that you take whatever's happening in the bin and you move it aside, and then you kind of reload one edge of the bin somewhere, and that would hopefully encourage the worms into, you know, moving into that area. Usually that's done when the material in the bin is already quite broken down, not when there's this much food in here, because then that food over on the freshly built side becomes the incentive for them to work their way over there. But when there's this much food, it seems unlikely that they'd have much motivation to go over into the new area. So I still kind of like the idea of feeding somewhere else. These big guys. Wow, awesome. Better look at how that bread down there is coming along too. Not much left of it. It just, maybe it's really actually gone. That's just the mold that was inhabiting it. Whatever, I don't know. I'm not a microbiologist. I'm not sure how all this works. Just get a kick out of watching all the stuff that I put in here eventually turn into the same brown stuff I could plant in my garden with. Alright, how's this for an idea? I'll let them finish working on whatever food scraps are down the middle, but since the edges are a little bit dry, we'll go ahead and we'll feed there, because the food in itself carries with it a fair amount of moisture. So we'll just kind of scoop things in towards the middle. We'll actually create 2 feeding zones on both sides. Kind of new for me now. I won't know how to mark this thing. Alright, so let's do the same as before. Let's use a little bit of fresh bedding, sort of as like a tablecloth, to set the stage for a yummy feeding of fresh food. But perhaps here, more than In the other one, we'll be adding moisture because we know the bin needs it. So we'll make sure we soak this dry material before we move ahead. Sounds like this thing's running low. Okay, now in can go some yummy food. I'm sure those banana peels will attract the crowd. Here too, I don't know what this is. Cucumber peelings, lettuce scraps, maybe. All kinds of varied greens. Give them a couple strawberries as well. Maybe a lemon peel or two. Alright, looks pretty good. Now, just to keep things easy to eat for them, just make sure the food is provided with some grit. We'll get rid of the last of the coffee in here too. Well, it's not really the last of the coffee because I've actually got 2 of these. So I've got plenty to go for the red wigglers. Oops. Looks like a rubber band made its way into the heap. Oops. Slingshotting kitchen scraps at myself with this little rubber band here. Okay. Alright, we'll just spread a little bit of this old stuff out across the new stuff. Try to level things off a little bit. And we'll return the cover. And like we did last time, we're going to take some of this water from the bottle and use it to dampen this paper. Here again, this paper is not very dry, but it is a little bit dry, so we'll just make sure it's nice and damp before we cover up. I think it was a good idea, like we did in the last one too, to cover up the paper on the very top as well. This way you're not really putting anything in there that's going to offset the moisture level. This way you get a sense of how much moisture is in there, and then it'll kind of stay that amount and not try to equalize on its own. So now as I cover up, I'm noticing this little tiny larvae. I don't know what it is. Could very well have missed it because it is tiny. Here you can see it compared to my pinky finger. And I think it was in a recent video, maybe even the last feeding video, I had a similar little larvae cruising around in my bin. And I guess not knowing what it is and just to play it safe, I squashed him. And I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to take this little guy and kind of factor him out of the equation. I'm sure that doesn't really solve the problem in general. I'm sure there's other ones cruising around. But I just don't really care to host a bunch of critters in my bin that weren't really placed there intentionally or deliberately. So I give a lot of critters that are in my bins a pass on that, but in this case, not knowing what that is, I prefer just not to have it in here. Alright, things are looking pretty good. Let's move on, get rid of these VermiBags, and finish off with the red wigglers. Oh yeah, I forgot to cover the feeding zone. So since the bin was fed in 2 spots, I've solved that with having 2 feeding zone indicators. Let me go put those away right now. So now before we get on to my red wigglers, let's start with what's actually my oldest red wiggler bin, is the one that's sitting back here behind the dark curtain, lit up with the Christmas lights. It's undergoing a time lapse of what you can tell there is the remainder of what used to be a whole pumpkin placed in there. So the worms are working that down. It's been about 60 days since this started, and I do have another video online. One of my most popular videos is one where about a year ago I took a fairly large pumpkin, much larger than this, and in about the same amount of time, 62 days, they whittled that pumpkin down to nothing. And pretty soon we'll have a new time lapse of this pumpkin getting eaten up too. So Before we get to the red wigglers, I thought we'd check in on what's really technically my oldest red wiggler bin, and as you can see, they're enjoying that pumpkin. So then, not counting that pumpkin time-lapse bin, this is my oldest regular bin that I need to keep tabs on a regular basis. What happened here during the last feeding, which was 10 days ago, was that I had set up, instead of the feeding being in the middle, which is where it had been up until then, last week it was switched from being in the middle to being over on the side. So I took all the contents of the bin, moved it over to here, and now at this point we're going to try making this into completely finished castings, encouraging the worms to make their way into the new space. I usually make my bins pretty level, and I think I see kind of a clear indication of a little bit of a slope, maybe suggesting that some of the food and bedding that was laid into the new feeding zone over here is obviously settled, but hopefully has been consumed to a certain degree as well. So curious, I want to just sort of do a cross section through here to get a sense of really how things look. And you know, over here it's cool and damp, over here it's dry and flaky and not quite as cool, and I can tell. So that might be part of the reason they're not going nuts in here, because most of this stuff is pretty dry. Interesting. Okay, good to know, good to know. Banana peels feel much more dry than they should be. Usually they're pretty gooey and everything like that. So this feeding zone obviously requires a little bit of improvement. I'll have to also go back to the video last time I fed in here to see what I did wrong. Because it's obviously not working and I don't want to repeat it. But you know what we'll do is just we'll just give this whole thing another little move aside, like so. This is the best idea I came up with, so let me know what you think. Take some of this dry stuff off the surface as well. Get it down to where the action's going to be. Down here, try to revive this in-progress food to make it more appealing. And I'll keep piling it up. Oof. Gotta be careful. I'm sure this is all mold coming off of this bread, all this dust, and I probably shouldn't be breathing it in. Alright. Let's see if we can try to help things out here a little bit. I'm sure one of the better things I can do is, like we've been doing in all the other ones, is laying down a little bit of paper that I could soak nicely with some fresh water. So start the whole thing off with an injection of extra moisture right from the start. Alright, and like we've been doing, we'll just put in a nice fresh load of food. Give these guys some citrus as well. Some potato. Handful of greens and purples. Even another banana peel. So all of this food, once it starts to thaw out, is going to kick out a whole bunch of moisture and make it really beneficial to the environment here. Get the moisture level up. This one, another banana peel. A couple strawberries. Some more cabbage, orange chunks. And perhaps one last banana peel with a piece of paper towel embedded into the middle of it. Alright. So once again, a nice appealing horizontal migration feeding zone set up to lure the worms out of what should eventually be finished compost and get them to make their way over to this side of the bin. Then I can help myself to their castings over here. Stick to moistening all the paper. Why not? Do it here too. And some coffee. Oops. Okay, looking good. I'll start just brushing things over here. Take these larger chunks that I find while doing it and also throw them over. I always like to sort of start out with a relatively level top surface, just so I can get a sense of how things have changed since it was last fed. Alright, put the marker back here on the edge to show that the feedings are happening over there. And since moisture was an issue here a little bit, let's boost things up by wetting this thing down as well. Normally I don't do this. You don't see me wetting down this paper that covers my bins, but this winter it's just been extremely dry. And I don't really run covers on my bins usually. Alright, that leaves us with one more bin to feed. And I think what I'm starting to realize is that in the winter time, leaving 10 days between check-ins on my bins might be a bit much. Unless I've really, taken measures to make sure there's ample moisture. But a little bit of dryness here and there never hurts. As long as the worms have someplace safe to go. As long as you could remedy the issue, the material become available again and things continue. But yeah, it's going to slow things down. So it's always best to keep all the material comfortable so that the worms want to be there. All right, let's get the last bin out here. It's a pretty good portion of food, maybe a little bit more than all the other bins have got, but if memory serves me correctly, this is a hungry bin. So we'll find a way to make this fit. Okay, so likewise in this bin, we set up a horizontal feeding over on this edge of the bin. And you can tell right away, again from the slope, the difference in what's happened here over the past 10 days is that there's a lot of action happening there, whether it's just settling of the material that's in there, hopefully the consumption of the material that's in there. So let's follow suit with what we did before. We'll just continue to try to move things over here so we can place down some fresh food over on the far outer edge. It'll give us a chance to peek inside. Okay, so the material in this bin is much more moist. I'm not sure over here yet, but right here where I'm starting to pile things up, I feel that the material is ample moist. I'm starting to see some chunks of older feedings, maybe a hunk of apple. So even though we fed on the edge, there was still probably a fair amount of surplus remainder food from the previous feeding in what had been the center of the bin, which we've now kind of shifted over a little in this direction. But things look really good over here. Just keep things kind of level here for now if we could. And we'll just bring a little bit more. I don't feel that real dryness like I did in the last bin, so things seem to be holding up better in this bin in terms of dryness. Here we're seeing this moldy bread. Here you can actually make out the fact that it's still bread. This edge of it, when you tear it, you could see for sure that it's bread still. Well, I'm sure it won't look that way for much longer. Down here, cantaloupe. So pretty good remnants of the last feeding. It seems to be a little bit better populated too, probably because of the fact that it's not as dry as the other one was. I'm sure the other one's going to recover now that we've had a chance to tend to a little bit here. But this one I don't think we need to worry about so much. So here we'll just make sure we've left sufficient room to put that stuff and then dump it in. Here I'm seeing a lot of leftover bedding type material scattered all over the place, and even surfacing from the bottom here as we start to get to that level. So here I don't think we need to add anything as a foundation for the feeding, and for that matter I wasn't paying attention. I used up everything I had anyway. So, not that I wouldn't be able to come up with some more, but since there's so much here, and I think we made adequate room at this point to add the food, we'll just use what's here already and call it a day. Okay. So into here, we'll go the remainder of our food. So drop it in. I'm not getting a clock. Well, that's because that was the last clip my camera took before it freaked out on me, and later on when I brought it upstairs to start taking off the video clips to get it all here into the editor, I could see there was only 12 seconds of space left on that chip, so it was completely at capacity. So it's not surprising that it pooped out. So either way, I ended up covering that up like I always do, and there was nothing out of the ordinary there. So I just wanted to, you know, take this as a chance to say thanks for sticking through to the end of the video, and hopefully you enjoyed this demonstration of me feeding my bins. And if you did, please, like always, remember to give me a thumbs up, because that's always really appreciated. And also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.